What kind of people are you? There's children here and you're shooting tear gas at us.
This golf course, that's the root of all the evil.
It's Mohawk land. It's our land. There's a little bit left. They're sucking the marrow out of our bones.
Some scenes from 30 years ago, like today's ongoing rail blockades, the 1990 Oka crisis erupted over land rights between Indigenous peoples in Quebec and the town of Oka. The tense armed standoff lasted 78 days and resulted in one fatality. Now, that fatality happened after Quebec police stormed the Mohawk barricade. Now, 30 years later, there are calls to again send the police into these protests that are blocking Canada's rail system. But could that risk a repeat of what happened in Oka? Harry Swain is an associate fellow at the University of Victoria's Centre for Global Studies and the author of the 2010 book Oka, A Political Crisis and Its Legacy. He joins me from Victoria. Harry Swain, thanks for joining us.
Nice to be here.
You were the deputy minister during the Oka crisis, so you have some experience relevant to this. How do you assess how the federal government has handled this current dispute to this point?
So far, so good. But things are markedly different now. Some of the things that, for example, that affect the way things are happening now, nobody had the internet or smartphones or the ability to summon a demonstration at a moment's notice. We had one prime minister and one premier who were involved in that affair, and they were good, close friends. They knew each other very, very well. They cooperated in a remarkable way. That's not exactly today's story. So, you know, also the backstory, the large-scale gambling and smuggling enterprises organized out of St. Regis are not part of today's issue at all.
No, it's a much broader disruption, though, as you say, and the internet really kind of makes it global in a lot of ways. But yeah. In terms of ending things, I guess, the Conservatives have been pretty clear. They want the federal government to direct the RCMP to enforce the law, to get provincial police where required to take down these barricades. Given your experience, would that be a wise move at this point?
It would not only be unwise, it would be illegal. This is not a country in which the politicians direct the police in any tactical sense. Remember also that, and this is another of the great differences, this is a game in which the police forces are front and center, as opposed to the army. The Sûreté de Québec, having lost a man at Oka, left the scene and left the Premier of Quebec with nothing to act with, as it were. He could have invited in the RCMP, chose not to, used an obscure provision of the National Defense Act to requisition the army. The army then behaved with incredible discipline, fortitude, and with a strong, strong desire to avoid any bloodshed.
The approach being taken, obviously, by the Prime Minister is to preach patience and dialogue. They're trying to have meetings with the Wet'suwet'en hereditary chiefs, which is really the flashpoint in all of this. But there's a condition there. The hereditary chiefs say no meeting unless the RCMP is pulled entirely off of Wet'suwet'en territory. Can the federal government concede to that request in a situation like this? Is this something they should consider?
Well, I understand that most of the police forces have already been withdrawn, and what's left is the usual constabulary that's you know, just part of everyday life. I don't believe it would be wise for the government to assert that it has ordered the RCMP out. That's not the way we do things in this country. But I think the RCMP, which, after all, the BC division is about a third of the total force, and its deputy commissioner is a very senior, very experienced officer. I think they can handle themselves pretty well.
What should be the next step right now? I mean, there is an attempt to have meetings. You know, Minister Bennett is saying she'll be in Smithers tomorrow with Scott Fraser, the British Columbia minister, on this. Mark Miller has made himself available to meet with the protesters at Tyendinaga whenever they want. I mean, what should the next step be here by the federal government?
And by the way, a footnote on that is that Mr. Miller has been learning Mohawk, which is an historic first in this country. yes, I think it is proper to seek consultations with the Wet'suwet'en. I think the problem is not with most of the community, and certainly with the elected chiefs, but with the hereditary chiefs who have said there is an absolute precondition. You've got to get the troops out, the police out, and you've got to get Coastal GasLink to depart the territory before we'll even talk. Well, those are awfully large preconditions. It's like telling North Korea, you got to stop all your thoughts about nuclear arms before we'll have a word with you. It's not going to go anywhere. I think the issue is going to have to be resolved within the Wet'suwet'en community. I would imagine that there are lots of conversations going on there now among their members about what the right course of action needs to be. I think the minister was correct in saying, yes, this is a divided community, but we cannot impose upon them a form of governance. They've got to figure that out for themselves. On the other hand, that's been a problem for quite a while.
Well, yeah, I mean, here we are 30 years after Oka, but back with, land dispute standoffs and calls for police to intervene. I mean, when you look at 1990 and compare it to now, do you fear a risk of escalation, or are we simply not at that point just yet?
I don't believe we're at that point just yet. Recall that the spark that set off the Oka affair was a dawn raid by the Sûreté de Québec, all dressed up like RoboCops and carrying assault weapons. That ended badly. And I don't think there's anybody around who sees that as a sensible approach to this.
So if you could offer one piece of advice to the Liberal government handling the current situation, what would it be?
Quietly encourage Wet'suwet'en to find a voice, maybe help them do it. Make all appropriate offers of assistance or mediation or whatever, knowing that they are unlikely to accept it. Wait for sensible voices to rise within that community. And I might say also within the Mohawk communities back east, where we saw some interesting statements yesterday. Half of them walked back today.
Yeah.
There's a lot of sensible voices on the other side of the fence, and we need to give them time to find themselves.
Is there enough patience, though, do you think, in the broader Canadian community for those sensible voices to find themselves?
Yes, and I think, for example, on urgent or medically necessary or employment critical shipments by CN Rail, I wouldn't be surprised by what the people at Tyendinaga might find themselves able to allow some of that to happen. I think likewise the obvious threats to future employment in the Wet'suwet'en territory will weigh on the people up there and have an effect on attitudes.
Okay, Harry Swain, thank you so much for your time and your perspective. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Hi, I'm Vashi Capellos, host of Power in Politics. See more of our show by subscribing to the CBC News channel or click the link for another video.